I wrote a 20-page script for my Elden Ring review after I beat the game the first time, but it was very rambly, and I just repeated myself a bunch, and didn't really clarify myself very well, so I figured I could do slightly better. I'll try to streamline my points as much as possible, and know that this is my current opinion on Elden Ring. It may change in the future. It has already changed since I first beat it. By the way, I played the game on PS5. I had mostly no technical issues, other than just, like, the inherent clunkiness of the game, which we'll talk about, but I didn't have, like, frame rate drops or anything. I had one part really early on where my inputs got really weird, and it was like, only accepting some inputs some of the time, and I had one part where I dismounted my horse, and I floated in the air until the game killed me. And then I had a couple of instances where graces wouldn't trigger. But I had, like, no pauses or frame rate issues, so I can't really speak to that kind of stuff has been going on in the PC version. I'm really not sure how to look at this game overall. I can't tell where I'd place it if I were to list all the FromSoft games. I'm at a total loss for how to judge it. I only have my momentary feelings and particular thoughts on different aspects of the game. To get some background out of the way, I don't like open world games. And my least favorite Souls game is a toss-up between Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3. Elden Ring is an open-world game, and Elden Ring is extremely similar to Dark Souls 3. Honestly, it goes further in that direction. So, I already have things kind of stacked against me going into it for my ability to like it. I made a 2-hour video a couple years, in the past few years, on why I don't like, or why I'm not a fan of Dark Souls 3. But I haven't gotten to talk as much about open-world games on this channel, so let's start with that. Obviously, open world is an approach to level design, or rather, it's perhaps a way of foregoing level design a lot of the time. There are a million different ways to do open worlds. You could easily argue that Dark Souls games are already open-world games, especially DS1, where you're never more than a few minutes away from almost every other location in the game. As such, they only give you fast travel at the halfway point in the game, and it never feels cumbersome to get to places before you unlock the fast travel in DS1. I don't like most open-world games in terms of their design. You see, I think Breath of the Wild is a good game. I think it's very well designed as an open world, for as well as open worlds can be designed, since I think they're inherently shitty concepts. I don't even play the open world games that most people don't praise. You know, I don't play Ubisoft open world games, at least the modern ones. I think my favorite open world game, I would say, would be probably Skyrim. And I'll get back to that in a minute, since I used to hate Skyrim and Fallout 3 and a bunch of other things. The appeal of open world design doesn't do much for me, and on the other hand, I really value the things that most open world games tend to leave by the wayside. I love level design. I love levels. I love progression of systems and difficulty. I think of, like, Portal as the opposite of an open world game. Portal is the most level-based shit ever. You only do each level in a row. The levels progressively use the same concepts in more complex and clever ways, and introduce new mechanics to add to your existing repertoire, and a level halfway through the game assumes that you've already beaten all the levels beforehand, so it gets exponentially more complex and harder, as it assumes you've already solved the puzzle before, so now let's do one that requires that same mentality, but more advanced. Overall, I think I like Breath of the Wild, but it's definitely not my favorite Zelda game, and still only kind of like it, you know? Even if I do respect many aspects of the design. Here are some of my major criticisms of Breath of the Wild. The gameplay doesn't progress in a satisfying way over time. This is the case for almost all open-world games. Take the shrines in Breath of the Wild. The game cannot assume that you've done any particular shrine or combination of shrines before doing whichever one you are at right now. So the game will never put something super complex using a certain mechanic or puzzle complex and then assume that you've already figured out the easy and medium versions of that puzzle using the same concept. See? The gameplay doesn't increase in complexity exponentially, you just kind of do more of the same relative level of complexity and difficulty. It doesn't base its trials strictly around new systems and evolve the challenges to expand your way of looking at the gameplay. See, what people seem to value in quote-unquote player freedom, I despise, because I like tightly constructed games. I like tightly constructed media. I like gameplay that is specifically made to develop and stay fresh and interesting. In open-world games, it's usually a giant sandbox where they just throw shit at the wall and then ask you to make your own fun, instead of giving you levels that are fun. The only way you can change up gameplay in a lot of open-world games is if you intentionally make up your own rules for yourself to follow. Like, if you're playing Metal Gear Solid 5, you can do nearly every level in the entire game the exact same way, every mission. Just mark the enemies, go in with a silenced tranquilizer gun, just hit everyone in the head, and do whatever you have to do, and then leave. It stays fun for a relatively long time because it has a decent amount of inherent nuance to it, but because it doesn't firmly establish any gameplay concepts and then slowly build off of those over time, it will wear out eventually. And then you just have to start approaching levels in different ways. Like, you just go in guns blazing on this level. Not because you have to, or because the level design really calls for it in this instance, but it's just you choose to play it differently to save yourself from the boredom and the boringness of the game design. You just arbitrarily decide to play in a different way to break up the monotony of doing every level the exact same fucking way. You are literally punished for solidifying your grasp on the mechanics. You know, the more tightly and intricately you master the mechanics, the more you're punished with boring gameplay. You know, you're punished for doing the same thing over and over, but just getting better at it. The other thing I can't stand about open world games, travel time. I hate staring at the screen, holding a control stick forwards, waiting for my fucking character to get from point A to point B. I hate this in any game, regardless of if it's open world or not, but open world games tend to suffer from this the most. My number one complaint with Breath of the Wild is that I cannot even play that game for an hour anymore, because I am so traumatized by how fucking much I hate waiting for Link to get his fat ass somewhere at the end of a straight line I'm pointing him in. If you really break down your actual playtime, minute by minute, I think around 40% or more of your active playtime in Breath of the Wild is just holding the control stick forwards. Just moving. Straight. Even in combat, this is annoying. You do like some big attack or some combo sequence and the last hit knocks the enemy backwards, flying. And then you need to slowly do your shitty little stamina draining sprint to run over to him for like 6 seconds straight until you can get back into combat range. It sucks. The more I notice it, the more it agonizes me, and then the cycle continues and it gets more and more painful until I just can't stand to play it anymore. In addition, a lot of the content of open world games tends to suffer from being really samey and getting watered down, and everything starts to feel like a checklist where you approach each new thing in the same way. Sometimes this can be a good thing, sometimes not so much. The games are basically just dopamine depositories. All you do is explore, find something, engage with it, and complete it, and then rinse and repeat. Endless dopamine cycle. But this often leads, for better or for worse, to the games being more addictive than fun, if you're the type of person who separates those concepts. I play Skyrim, I like Skyrim, because it's addictive. Because it has optimized the fuck out of dopamine cycles. I always feel like I'm finding more shit, expanding my map, getting different kinds of XP, valuable resources for short-term and long-term, and so on. I always feel like I'm being rewarded and completing things and checking boxes, so I'm not bored, but it's also not really like I'm having fun either. I'm just satisfied psychologically. My reward center of my brain is sated. I'm not really having a thrill ride or having a big smile on my face. It's just engaging. Now, sometimes I just want to kill a few hours of my time. I don't really want to think hard about some new complex narrative, storytelling, or try hard at some challenging gameplay, or some like brain-busting strategy game. I just want to not be bored for a bit, and maybe just feed my addiction to dopamine loops if I am addicted. So I'll play some dopamine, I'll play some Skyrim or something. It's not a bad thing to have games that are simply addicting, but I still think it's important to mark the difference between addiction and fun. When I'm playing Being a Dick, I am having fun. I have a big-ass smile on my face the whole time. I am happy. Open-world games, most of the time, at their best, will only just be addicting for me. Rarely are they ever fun. On the other hand, open-world games have appeals in that you can do whatever you want in any order that you want. Like the freedom to construct your own playthrough, which I really could not give less of a fuck about. And there's the exploration and discovery appeal, which is decent, but only really applies to your first playthrough, or as long as you're discovering new things or don't remember everything, you know? So, back to Elden Ring. The discovery and exploration aspect, the appeal, goes hand in hand with Soulsborne and makes perfect sense as a fit for the genre. I will say the discovery appeal is probably the most fun part of Elden Ring. If I had to pick one thing that is clearly super great about Elden Ring, it'd be the monster designs. Okay, I'm not gonna front. It'd be the monster designs. I think I'm just kind of tired of fantasy aesthetics, so I'm not big on the whole look of the game, but the designs of people and creatures are fucking rad. I love the birds with the swords, and a giant with a big fucking Cyclops face on his chest, and Radahn's goofy fucking horse. I love being a maidenless fucking loser. I always wind up being too tense while playing these games. I take them a bit too seriously, inherently, while they're still, you know, killing me. So I never appreciate the meme factor, the memeability enough, because I'm distracted by trying to master the gameplay, which is definitely a big shame in this case. Because the game has a lot of memeability, and I don't really enjoy the gameplay that much. As far as open-world games go, Elden Ring is not the best I've played. But recall, I can only even tolerate playing the best of the best open-world games. I don't play Ubisoft shit. I played like an hour of Horizon Zero Dawn, and I was just like, what the fuck? Like, what is this open world shit? Why does this even exist? Like, I'd much rather play a version of this game that's just linear levels, just level after level, and ignore all this nothingness crap in between. So, a decent open world game to me is probably a masterpiece to people who actually like the genre of open world. I think Elden Ring is a decent open world. Its world structure and design is not as good as Breath of the Wild, which has really clever use of sightlines, colors, land masses, you know, showing and hiding certain things in the environment and directing the player's attention. Elden Ring has a good landscape most of the time. The terrain structure provides a lot of exploration in a tight area, looking for items and semi-hidden doors and the like. Only the biggest, most obvious structures are plainly visible all the time. Elden Ring has these statues that point to a secret door nearby in some cases, but in almost every case, I found that the doors to not be that hidden in the first place to even warrant a statue pointing them out. Several of them, I found the door before I found the statue pointing to it. There are also these tedious, like, spirit trees that summon slow-ass ghosts for you to follow to a location. These are mostly meaningless. They take fucking forever to follow the ghost, and 90% of the time, they lead you to a location that is so overtly obvious you couldn't have fucking missed it with the slightest effort in exploring. There's some open-world platforming and some tighter foot platforming in certain levels that sometimes hide stuff. I gotta say, one thing I found kind of annoying in this game was that there are a lot of instances where something is clearly accessible, like there is some way to platform on this shit. There's this ledge you can go up, or there's this hidden ledge you can access and run around, but a lot of them don't have shit. They just waste your time. It just feels weird because sometimes it's very hard to tell what is or is not intentionally put into the game for you to be able to platform. Some of the clearly intentional platforming is really, really ghetto and doesn't visually look like you're supposed to platform on it at all. I think the most ghetto-looking platforming is Right in the first area, there's a teleporting chest where if you open it, it teleports you. The transporter trap teleports you to a mine in Caelid with like a lot of the magical people mining. And there's if you continue in through that dungeon, right, you jump on a roof and then you jump over to a thing, and there's an item that you can pick up. But it's like on some really, really awkward, shitty looking, like complete broken planks that do not look even remotely like you're supposed to be able to platform on them, and you kind of can't. Like, it's really unclear which parts are actually allow you to stand on them and which parts are just like fucking weird physics objects that you're not going to interact with. So that looks super ghetto, and it looks like you're not supposed to platform on it, but you clearly have to get that item. And then other things, you know, there's parts where you clearly can platform on something, and then you spend all your time, like, traveling around this building, and then you get fucking fuck all nothing for it. So, yeah. A lot of them just lead you to dead ends with jack shit. The game gives you pretty solid guidelines with the paths of grace. You can get an idea of what is optional and what is leading to something progressively more difficult just by hitting up each grace that you find. It's kind of hard to comment on the exploration personally, I'll be honest, because my brain was mostly shut off while exploring since I was in like a flat dopamine loop. And partly because I'm on like my 6th playthrough now, and most of my exploring was done in playthrough number 1, obviously, so I don't remember it all that clearly. I think the skulls that appear in the world randomly that drop like 200 runes is a really clever design choice for the open world. It's similar to like the random little mini games that would pop up in the ocean sailing in Wind Waker, except 200 runes is actually valuable, at least early to mid game. It is well worth swerving to pick them up. It's only, like, the only issue is that late game the value doesn't increase at all, so they stop being useful, and thus they stop motivating you to, like, mosey around the environment as much, so to speak. One thing that I definitely remember from my first playthrough is that the sheer amount of time I wasted aimlessly trying to figure out how to access something. There's a really annoying constant throughout the whole game where you can see something either fairly close or fairly far away. You know, if you're in the underground, you see Mohg's palace in the distance, and you think, can I access that from here? Because at that point, as far as you know, you're at the only access point to an underground area. You're in the lake area, and you see the plateau to the west of the big lake, right? Where Ronnie's questline ends, and you run around underneath, scratching your head, being like, how the fuck do I get up there? I see there's a building, it's on the map. How the fuck do I get up there? You're getting no clues. Every time you look around the environment, you get no answers as to how to access that area you can clearly see. But the truth is, you have to do a quest line in a completely different location. Half the time, you see something you can't figure out how to access, you run into this horrible dilemma. You have two choices in front of you. Do you just try to find the thing that you're missing nearby and tirelessly search for an access point that you're just missing? That might just be like weird or kind of hidden or might not exist at all? Or do you say, fuck this, maybe I can access it later randomly and just move on? The game is always really, really unclear about when you see something. You know, is it a this cannot be accessed right now situation, or is it it can only be accessed by something totally random in a completely different part of the world map? Or am I just missing how to access it right now? Like, why bother even showing you areas or items that's not clear to access currently if you're just going to blue ball the players until later? You're just making players waste time trying to figure out how the fuck to get to what you're showing them. You know, open world is already a genre that inherently wastes a lot of the player's time without giving them that much back in return. So to have even more of my time wasted trying to figure out how to get to places or items or shit that I eventually decided must only be accessible from elsewhere was really fucking annoying. If the game was just more clear about giving you hints that you can't access something right now that's plainly in your vision, I'd be more okay with this world design. Progression and reward systems in the game are also fairly flawed. Most of your progression comes from getting useful equipment, useful gear, and leveling up your weapons, and also getting the flask upgrades. And then slowly, you also get stronger through leveling up. Sometimes this is significant, sometimes not so much. So long as your levels go to something useful, you know? You get important items like golden seeds and sacred tears from just the general map exploration, and those items are much easier to stumble upon in plain sight in the terrain. So a lot of it comes down to getting souls for levels and getting meaningful gear and getting smithing stones. Therein lies the problem. Also, if you're, depending on your build, getting weapon arts and shit. Therein lies the problem. In Elden Ring, if you don't already know exactly where something is that you want when you're exploring, you basically only have like a 5% chance of getting something worthwhile from any place that you go to. That I definitely remember that from my first playthrough. If I have like a quality build in my stats, you know, I'll play through the majority of areas picking up like strength or dex weapons or weird magic weapons or spells I'll never use, or like ash spirit summon things I don't want to use. And even if I did use them, I'd still only use like the few good ones in the game. And if I want to upgrade my weapon, I can't just generally find smithing materials and constantly be progressing to an upgrade. You have to find the exact material type to get the next upgrade. If I find a 7, if I find like a Somber Stone 7, it's not just better than a 6. If I haven't gotten a 6 yet, I can't even use the 7. So progression is very fucking random. On my first playthrough, I was stuck at a +6 forever, after suddenly and quickly shooting up to +6, and that's when I finally found a Somber Stone 7, and then I instantly shot up to +9, and was suddenly a million times stronger just from this one random thing I happened to pick up in this one location randomly. The progression isn't gradual or natural or even blocked behind clearly defined challenges. It's just randomly stumbling across shit that you can actually put to good use. And if you explore because you generally want runes to level up, well, bad news. That's a terrible reward for exploration in this game, in a lot of the game, especially after you're done with... in my 6 playthroughs so far, I have found that once I complete most of Limgrave and I go to Liurnia of the Lakes, that's when I feel that the game slows down the most, because I don't feel like significantly strong enough to go straight to the Altus Plateau or do a bunch of the shit in Caelid, but also the rewards in Liurnia are super mediocre, and you don't, get much stronger much faster. So yeah, anyways, if you just want runes to level up, like if that's the reward that you get from exploring, why not just abuse a really good farming spot instead of exploring new areas? A farming spot will cash you more runes faster than exploring will, in most circumstances. So basically, you're just exploring for the sake of exploring, and for the very small chance that you'll actually end up finding something that benefits you in a meaningful way. Especially as the game went on, I was just completing things just for the sake of completing them, because it's less boring than just grinding some place for levels, and because I'm addicted to the dopamine loop, of course, but mainly it's just the fact that there's the slight chance that I'll actually get something that I can use for my build. Compare that to the reward structure in Skyrim. Skyrim encourages constant exploration and completion of the things you run into by having quests that reward you with XP and other goods for completing and discovering new places. You get different types of XP, so every action you take has a different meaningful value. You can use most of the stuff you constantly find exploring new areas, and new areas also have gold to pillage. See, Skyrim separates gold from XP. So it doesn't just encourage you to farm XP, gold is limited by where you find it. So you keep going to new places to find more, and gold is very useful in the game. Everything you get can gain you more rewards, like smithing materials you need for more smithing XP, or for stuff you actually want to smith for value, or to make items that you can sell after you make them. You also get alchemy XP from mixing the stupid ingredients you pick up along the way, which all contributes to your overall level as you level up these various different things. As well as filling out the compendium of ingredients. You're filling out a list of all the traits of the different ingredients that you have. And also, very importantly, there is meaning to selling your shit in Skyrim. You can actually, if you pick up something you're not going to use in your build or whatever, you can get decent gold for selling things. Unlike in Elden Ring, where you can find some legendary spell and then sell it for maybe 500 runes. A piddly, meaningless amount. Everything you do in Skyrim feels like you're being rewarded in multiple ways, and it encourages you to keep doing it, whereas in Elden Ring, a lot of the times, you have to stop and ask yourself, what the fuck am I even really getting out of these dungeons I keep clearing? So, I have fairly big issues with the reward structure in Elden Ring and the progression unnaturalness. Those are most of my critiques about the open world design of Elden Ring. I feel bad for not talking as much about all the things that everyone is already talking about, like it was thrilling to not know how big the map was at the start of the game. You know, I definitely agree with that, especially when I first unlocked the underground area. You know, that was really cool. I will say, I did start to feel a bit caged in as the game continued. I'd already cleared out most of Limgrave and Caelem on my first playthrough. Each area after that felt like it didn't have as many places to investigate that I was at least aware of. You know, like, oh, gotta go up Mount Gilmer, gotta go through the Mountain of Giants and some shit. You know, I think the most fun I had exploring in the whole game was right at the start, in the early game, with Limgrave and Caelid. I said Caelem, didn't I? And before I beat Godric. After I beat Godric, I felt pretty overpowered on my first playthrough for most of the game, and I wanted the game to have some challenge to it still. So I beelined the main path stuff until I reached challenge again. You know, I was like, okay, well, I won't go and collect more things. I'll just go to stronger areas until I reach a challenge. So I blitzed through Renala, didn't take very long to beat Radahn, and I was feeling pretty lackluster about exploring by then. It felt like the magic of exploration, like the veil of pretending like it was important, was gone at that point, and I was just slaughtering main story bosses. I tried to get back to exploring what I'd run past, but it mostly felt like boringly clearing check marks on a map. Everything was either a cakewalk or like a mild annoyance, you know, like not actually difficult, but it just like might obstruct me here and there, like it might kill me here and there, and it wasn't hard to go back and beat it again, so it was just like wasting my time. After that, exploring wasn't really fun ever again. Like I was saying with most of these open world games, the appeals are pretty weak for me. At best, most of my experience with this game was just mild enjoyment. I wasn't having the time of my life, it wasn't a blast, I was just slowly getting the little hits of dopamine for doing the gameplay exploration loop thingy. I have trouble judging this game, because most of the time I was enjoying it, but not like that much. It was much more like I was addicted to it. Not really having a lot of fun, it didn't give me a high, it even didn't give me high highs, you know? I had a mostly positive experience with it, I think, but I actually remember and I can visualize the negatives that I experienced. So I will have more complaints in this video than praise. I think the biggest issue I have with the open worlds is that this game has two conflicting appeals. It wants to be a dopamine loop open worlds like completionist thing, and it wants to be a Soulsborne game. This does not work in the way that it's designed. The problem is, if you do the dopamine loop thing, you end up trivializing the vast majority of the gameplay. You just get way too strong too easily sometimes. Depends on which build that you go through, but to enjoy one appeal, you have to forego the other. Most of the game on my first playthrough is piss cake easy. The game eventually flattens out near the end and gets back to actually requiring some amount of effort, since there is a limit to how much you can level your weapons and your flesh, and also, upon beating it way more times, I think the end game is like weirdly fucking overtuned compared to everything else before it. But yeah, exploring made almost the whole game become super easy. But like I said, part of the lack of real fun I had in playing was probably due to me taking it too seriously. Like, if I was playing with some friends and memeing with it the whole time, exploration would have probably been a lot more enjoyable. If I was playing online and had more, like, messages to say, hey, you can't get this shit, or hey, try this, you know, this is how you access this, would have been more convenient. I'll talk about that in a bit. But I always play these Soulsborne games trying to be a perfectionist about all the encounters and the gameplay and stuff, and that really ruins my vibes. The quest design and world layout and stuff is about as obtuse as it usually is in the previous games, arguably to a greater extent, and with the added pressure of the massive open world, which is a bit much for me. In the past games, quests can be very arbitrary and very unclear how to advance them. But the worlds are fairly small, and there aren't that many NPCs to talk to. But in this game, like the Shabiri Grape Lady, you just have to stumble across her in multiple different locations in this massive open world with no hints in order to progress your storyline. But don't explore in the wrong places, or progress too much in this way, or you'll lock out this questline for good. The sheer volume of open world, and people to talk to, and stuff to test out, and stuff to look around, means that it's now borderline impossible to do a lot of these quests of your own volition without a guide or blind luck of stumbling across the right shit. However, I actually don't think of this as a criticism per se, it just annoyed me while I was playing. But I played the game entirely offline, like I said, and I really think this game was clearly built with its online mechanics in mind, you know? If an entire dungeon and multiple bosses in the Volcano Manor are trapped behind some random fucking invisible wall that doesn't even look like it would be an invisible wall, well, that's what online messages are for. The trolling of fake bullshit messages is just a part of the community. It's part of the intended experience, right? I had to look up shit because I wasn't playing online, but this game is definitely supposed to be like a community event for all the tarnished to tackle or impede each other together. Let me give you an example, and this I actually will list as a criticism. At one point while exploring, I bought a note from a merchant that was supposed to tell me the location of a secret cave in Caelid, the Celia Hideaway. The note read something along the lines of, "Beyond the graveyard in Celia." That's it. So I thought to myself, well, Celia, the town of sorcery, doesn't have a fucking graveyard. So maybe they mean the church above the town that has some graves around it. Even though I wouldn't really consider that to be part of the town of Celia, which is what the note specifically says, but whatever, I'll go investigate that. There's a bunch of gravestones just randomly placed in front of, to the side of, and behind the church at the top of the hill. So I'm like, okay, it says beyond the graveyard. What the fuck does that mean? I start looking over the ledges of the cliffs, but the graveyard is all spread out and has no real structure to it, so I have no idea what beyond even fucking means. Basically, I spend like 20 minutes running around these stupid graves and also going back to the actual Celia town below to find like maybe some hidden graveyard I wasn't aware of that might fit the description of a graveyard in the town of Celia. But no, in fact, I had to look it up. I bought a note from this fucking guy and I still had to look it up. I found a completely separate patch of gravestones that was not really connected to the rest of the ones nearby the church that is even further away from the town of Celia, and this one had a wall behind it that could be struck and removed. Basically, the note that I paid runes for in-game was fucking worthless, and the description and hint actively misled me, so that was annoying as shit. So those are my thoughts on the open world. Let's move on to the bigger topic, combat. I would go so far as to say I think I actually overall dislike this game's combat. Even Dark Souls 3, I'd still consider the combat to be the main appeal, and I have a lot of issues with it, but I think it's overall positive. It's fun to play, but I'm about 6 playthroughs in right now in Elden Ring, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this enemy, don't like fighting them. Oh, this boss, nope, not a fun one. Oh, this area is fucking annoying. Well, let's take a step back and explain why that is. A lot of what I'm about to say is pretty much exactly what I said in my video on why I don't like Dark Souls 3, because all of those problems carry over into Elden Ring. Literally every single one. Now, I'm like a fucking narc-ass perfectionist in most types of games. I like optimizing. I see Soulsborne games as a fairly easy, slow action game genre where basic observation and memorization are the most important factors in success. They're satisfying games to play because they have good game feel and because you can see yourself improving drastically since so much of your success is based on memorization. You know, you can go from not knowing anything to just learning a few basic things, and your success rate drastically goes up. You learn the moves and patterns and test and figure out what works and what works even better, and you get stronger and faster and more consistent. I'm not competitive enough to actually start doing like speed running or anything. I don't really look at online advice or online builds or anything like that. I just pick stuff and try to apply it in a way that makes logical sense. So, in the early Souls games, patience and passivity are the virtue at stake. The game is extremely easy if you just wait and observe safely and then take action once you know what will work, and the game punishes rash action. The games are very slow, the enemies are slow, the attacks are slow. It's all very calculated. It's not about reaction speed, really. It's about basic observation and emotional control to wait and calmly time your dodges, no matter the situation or any other actions. It's about nuanced footwork and positioning yourself at the right place to outspace enemy actions and paying attention to multiple factors at once. Dark Souls 3 is where the biggest shift in the series happens. Sure, Bloodborne is slightly more rewarding to aggressive play due to certain systems and the fact that you need to dodge instead of blocking, thus making it more dangerous, slightly more dangerous to try to play passively against new enemies. But not really. I mean, Bloodborne still has almost entirely pretty slow enemies with long startups and recoveries on their attacks. The speed of the game is determined by you most of the time, not the enemies. It's still a game that will heavily reward just hanging back, outside of the range of the enemy's attacks, observing and safely testing things out until you feel confident in engaging. DS3 says, fuck that. You know, just fuck it. Brain dead play for the win. Are you actually using your eyeballs? That's pussy shit. Best defense in DS3 is mindlessly mashing the dodge button. It's way harder to react to the moves in DS3 and dodge correctly. The attack strings are longer. It forces you to dodge more often because attacks from enemies also travel like 50 fucking miles with every swing, so you can't outspace any of them, so your spacing in your footsies isn't really a thing anymore. Enemies have weird-ass animations where they just change up the speed of their swing suddenly and make it hard to dodge based on visual communication. In DS3, it's hard to defend and survive through observation, and it's relatively easy to defend by being fucking brain dead and mashing the dodge button. They rebalance the stamina system to support this behavior as well. Now, mashing dodge takes next to no stamina. The game is so much faster than previous Souls games, so you have less luxury to look at the stamina gauge and other factors while playing. Stamina management isn't really as much of a thing in DS3. When you're dodging at least, and it's even less of a thing in Elden Ring. Each action isn't really a commitment of that resource anymore. Same applies to offense. DS3 makes gimmicky bullshit really, really powerful. It makes weapon arts a big deal and gives you these strong-ass armor moves, and you're supposed to use them because actually trying to study an enemy and learn when they're vulnerable and, like, no-hit run everything perfectly without using any, like, parries or anything like that or abusable shit. It's just way easier to mash out an armor move regardless of what the enemy's actually doing at the time, right? The game is made super fast, enemies are super aggressive, they attack quickly, they run at you, they sprint full bar at you all the time, which makes group fights look fucking stupid as hell, since all the enemies all just clump together thanks to their incredibly simplistic behavioral AI that just makes them run straight at you all the time until they're in striking range. Shield enemies turn to face you while blocking more quickly than they used to, so it's harder to get behind them without them doing an action, so you have less freedom to take action from neutral since enemies' attacks are so fast. Even their armor moves are really fast, so as soon as you hit a button against an enemy that is currently, when you saw them and chose to attack, they were in an idle animation, but they could have transitioned from that idle animation to doing an attack that's so fast that it will hit you out of your attack, or at least armor through your attack, and then hit you before you can recover from your move and dodge. So you have way less freedom to actually take action if the enemy is, like, right in front of you. Enemies all travel a mile with each swing. They have more swings back-to-back in a single sequence. Spacing doesn't exist anymore. Like, just fucking forget about it. All attacks reach you almost all the time because enemies are just sliding across the ground to fucking hit you. You just have to block or dodge a bunch of them. You can't carefully play outside the enemy's effective range like in the other games and use your feet to fight with more control over your direct positioning and less stamina commitment. Like, in the previous games, using footsies for defense was the optimal play. In the prior games, since you could strike right away, you didn't have to wait for your dodge recovery to be done, you didn't have to wait for a block stun or a dodge roll to finish, you didn't have to be too close to an enemy if you didn't want to be, and it's also just way more, it's a million times more mechanically interesting to deal with enemy attacks through simple movement. Simple walking and sprinting rather than dodging, because it's infinitely more complex and based on a lot more nuanced variables, whereas dodging is often just, are you in invuln frames right now, or are you not? Wow, how nuanced. In addition, when you use spacing as the tool to deal with enemy offense and create openings to safely deal damage, it's much more based around your weapon and your build, and you have to select which of your attacks suits the range and speed if you need an attack strong enough to knock them out of a certain animation, or any other factors like if there are other enemies around, you want to precisely aim your swings to clip multiple enemies, whereas when you're dodging to avoid all of the attacks and create openings, well, your invuln frames dodge the move, so you can just end up right in front of the enemy. You don't really have to think about which attack suits the current positioning and spacing, you just attack. Most weapons have fairly similar functional, like, roll attacks, so the nuance really just disappears. Like, I've been playing a bunch of different builds with, like, different speeds and strengths of weapons, and I'm generally just still doing the same shit, because the nuance of my spacing doesn't really matter in 90% of situations. Beyond that, when enemies have these long sequences of attacks where you just have to keep dodging until the end, or at least until you reach some punishable point, it also negates the nuance of even that sequence that you're dodging, because basically the only dodge that really matters is the last one. Say an enemy does 3 swipes in a row, and I'm just forced to dodge them until the very last hit where I can dodge it and then punish the recovery of it. Well, my first 2 dodges don't matter. They don't matter at all. They have no nuance to them. I could dodge them left, right, forward, backward, anything in between, and it won't change a thing, because the only one that matters is the last one, where I should dodge in the correct direction to get the ideal punish or positioning that I want. In DS3, so many enemies are so aggressive, in fact with so little recovery on their attacks and such long sequences of constant fucking hitboxes, that it becomes unreasonable to fight multiple enemies at the same time. Take just a regular piss-ass zombie in the old games. They take a full 2 seconds, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, to start up and do a basic swing. And then they sit in recovery of that swing for another 4 seconds or so. This is easy as fuck to deal with while fighting one-on-one, but it becomes more interesting when they're in a group fight. They add more complexity to the fight in a number of ways. You have to keep track of their positioning. They don't sprint all over the place and do massive fucking dodge rolls everywhere. So, keeping track of their positioning becomes more reasonable without constantly staring at that one enemy. And you have to mentally keep track of if they're currently in recovery or not, deciding which enemy you should try to kill off first. So if they're in a group fight, that slow movement and that long-ass recovery lets you use your fast reaction speed and awareness to see all of them, all the other enemies, and calculate what is going on in totality. You can still fight 5 enemies at once and confidently approach them without getting hit one fucking time. In those games, you can see them whiff a move, and then you don't have to look at that enemy for another 7 seconds or so, because you know they're in recovery and can't hit you by then. And they won't have moved from that position by then. It adds so many possibilities for encounters and for level design, but in DS3, almost all enemies have a couple of super fast attacks with really fast recovery and really far-reaching fast movement, so it's much less reasonable to fight them in groups. Group fighting is less about managing all of this information at once, and it's more about just spamming these huge area-sweeping armor moves. Wow, how nuanced! Enemies seem like they're designed to be fought one-on-one at peak performance, like the basic knight enemy with a shield and a longsword, right? In DS3, they have 2 attacks that are extremely difficult to react to unless you're focusing only on them. And you can see them transition from idle or walking animation to their stupid fucking super fast attacks. In a group, it's total bullshit. It's just flat out unfair. You don't calculate them, what move they're about to do, what recovery they're in, what positioning they have. You simply use other means to try to crowd control something it's not reasonable for you to actually analyze next to all the other enemies that are also in the room. Not to mention, I find it annoying to play a game where I want to beat something perfectly every time once I've memorized it and I know all the patterns and I have more or less all the information I need to perfectly punish everything. But sometimes I just get randomly clipped by a move because it's so fucking stupidly fast and I just didn't get my dodge out in time. Some people might disagree with that. I'll talk about that in a bit. I'll talk about why I prefer these games to be easy and based on simple memorization later on in this video. So yeah, a lot of the time, 1 enemy is annoying, 2 are bullshit. This is doubly true of Elden Ring. If I were to sum up Elden Ring's combat, I would simply say 1 enemy is annoying, 2 are bullshit. In fact, might as well make that the title to this Elden Ring essay. Here, let me show you. 1 enemy. Annoying. 2 enemies.
Oh, nice. I can't even tell what's happening. Wow. Amazing gameplay.
Bullshit. 1 enemy.
Wow, I like when you comboed it. I like how...
Annoying. 2 enemies.
Yep, now they're comboing me. Yep, now I can't fucking see anything. Nope, I figured that was the super fast one because they all literally look exactly the same. Oh, great, I dodged 2 of them in a row, and I get nothing. Sounds like a good trade, sounds like a very fair, well-balanced game design trade. Oh my god, this is fucking unplayably shitty. This is genuinely one of the shittiest things I've ever played.
Bullshit. I can do this with so many fucking enemies and so many encounters. Some enemies I seriously hate, like the sword birds, dogs, green little goblins in the dungeons, the zombies with the double command grabs, the dual sword enemies in Castle Sol, the grafted, teleporting, poison-spitting enemies, the giant hands, and to a lesser extent the little hands, dogs, literally all big enemies, all like tall enemies, which is like almost all, like over half the enemies in the game. The guys in that one fort that throw the exploding glitter over and over, and dogs. I apologize if I forgot any other enemies that I fucking despise fighting. Anyways, we're not done with the DS3 comparisons. Let's pump the brakes on that a little bit. Not talking about Elden Ring yet. Yes, enemies have stupid speed, stupid range, they have annoying mobility, which destroys group fights since there's no managing all enemy positions if they all drastically change every second. Annoying mobility in the fact that tons of enemies can escape your attacks with huge sidesteps you can't chase down, and waste more of your time just purely based on RNG of the fact that they abuse those defensive sidesteps, which can massively fuck you over in some group fights if you can't kill certain enemies quickly because they just spam their defensive moves. No recovery on any of their attacks, these long-ass sequences of attacks, and the ability to cancel all of their attacks into a bunch of their other attacks. With very, extremely unclear limitations that make it very hard to tell when an enemy is actually done swinging and can be safely whiff punished. And just generally stupid aggression from enemies. But those are not the only problems. In DS3, you have genuinely unfair moves, like sometimes an enemy recovers from an attack so quickly that you flat out can't punish it safely. Sometimes, to get a hit in, you flat out either have to abuse a gimmicky mechanic or take a risk against the enemy's RNG. You either gamble on the RNG or wait for fucking ever until the enemy actually does something that you can safely punish. RNG is fucked. Like, sometimes an enemy or boss will do something really easy to avoid, where you can get several safe hits in as a punish, and sometimes they'll do a long-ass sequence with a lot of variable cancel options that's hard to defend against, and that ends with you not being able to get any punish at all. The RNG is super stupid. One of the most basic principles of game design is to make every action your enemy takes clearly punishable somehow. Hollow Knight does this, why can't DS3? They shouldn't have some good moves and some bullshit moves that are only chosen at random. You know, if an enemy has moves that are more difficult to deal with, you should get more reward for dealing with them. If an enemy randomly keeps trying to attack and gets hit stunned to death by RNG, or the RNG makes them spam a sidestep away from you a bunch of times, making the fight take 3 times longer and requiring 3 times the effort, that's stupid. That's fucking stupid. The movement, especially for these enemies, is fucking insane. Tons of enemy attacks involve their bodies and their hurt boxes suddenly and drastically moving somewhere. Meaning if you were swinging at where they were literally just a couple frames ago, you miss them because RNG made them teleport away from that position. Combine that with insane enemy recovery speed, and tons of enemies, like the greenstone goblin guys especially, can do all sorts of attacks, and if you try to dodge them and then swing, you'll likely miss them or maybe only graze them because they spammed a movement, and if you try to swing before they attack, you also gamble on the RNG as well. So much of landing attacks on enemies comes down to pure RNG of what movement they happen to input milliseconds prior to it. I think this might actually be the most annoying part of the entire game. At least without a shield, because shields mitigates this somewhat depending on the enemy type, like the goblins. They stay in place when they recoil off your shield. But because it leads to a bunch of the combat being insanely RNG focused. Landing a hit in a lot of fights is totally RNG based. Like, did the enemy do move that has real recovery? Can you hit them? It's insane how much the game wants enemies to move around in completely unpunishable ways. In this game, dogs and rats have armor. Yes, they have poise. When you hit a dog, they'll probably spam some sort of sidestep or backstep that has fucking armor. Yes, when you land a hit on a dog doing any sort of movement option that they have, you will not hit stun them. You don't knock them out of their animation. They armor through your attack with their movement. You have tons of fights and bosses where it's super RNG based. Do the enemies abuse moves where it's almost impossible to land hits on them consistently? Do they do super long moves and no gaps? Does Melania do her fucking like move that will just fucking hit you if you're anywhere nearby her when she does the move startup? So on and so forth. Do they do easy moves that are easy to avoid and you can punish heavily? Fuck you. Elden Ring is also the first Souls game I would say has bad controls. The dodge input is a big annoyance. Let's start there. The way dodging works in Soulsborne is you hold the button to run, and then you tap the button to dodge. So the dodge can only register once you release the button. You have to press, then release it. When you hit the button, if your thumb doesn't also release it in time, the dodge will not come out, or its timing will be slightly inconsistent because of this inefficient system. In the earlier games, this was very mitigated as a problem. You know, when you locked onto enemies, it changes the control scheme. In like Demon Souls and all the older ones, when you're locked on, it removes your ability to sprint in any direction except for forwards. You can only sprint forwards. Meaning that when you hit the dodge button while moving to the left or right or backwards or whatever, it just dodges. It just dodges right away. DS3 changed it so you can free run while locked on, but this means that the dodge input is shitty all the time. DS3 is also much faster and has much more awkward timings to their attacks. The animations of attacks are much less clear ahead of time about when a move will hit, and It has more active frames on its attacks, so the dodging has to be more precise to avoid all of the active frames, with all of the iframes. So it's harder for your eyes to give you the dodge timing you need. Attacks tend to have more active frames as well, and, you know, all these factors make it so your dodges don't come out when you clearly reacted to a move on time. The dodge input is clunky as hell, and it isn't suited for the speed of the game. There's also the issue of dodge buffering. Your dodge input will buffer for about, a fucking hour? It lasts around a solid 3 full seconds, maybe more. You can be hit at the same time that you release the button to dodge, you know, like react to a move, hit the button, release it, your dodge doesn't come out in time, the hit stun will last 2 seconds, and without you pressing any additional inputs, it will inexplicably dodge after the hit stun ends. This is just trying to kill the player through bad controls and nothing else, by clearly not giving them what they wanted from a button press. The speed of the game makes it much more likely that a move will just suddenly connect with you, and we'll talk about other reasons why this will happen in a bit, creating this buffer situation, and it will buffer all your inputs. It'll buffer jumps as well, and anything like that. The clunky input of the dodge already has, you know, made it so it's more likely that you'll hit the button not on time. The game didn't register, well, you will do it on time, but the game won't register you releasing it on time or something like that. Purely bad control design, right? This buffer system is fucking awful. I've seen people argue that this is just another aspect of the difficulty, but where exactly does that argument end? Right? Like, how far can you go to justify literally just bad controls? Are bad controls excused as game challenge? Seriously? There has to be some limit where controls are just actually bad, and this is it. Also, the camera is psychopathic and out for blood. This has a major impact on the consistency of moving and dodging and jumping around attacks. Because enemies will constantly do movements and attacks where they will drastically move by you, and your lock-on camera will move with them. So if you hit the dodge button forwards on frame 5 of an action, you'll dodge, say, north. But if you hit the dodge button while holding forwards on frame 8 instead, 3 frames later, you'll suddenly dodge in a totally different direction than north, because the camera has suddenly turned due to following the enemy's erratic movements. And the enemies don't just move by, like, clear movement, like walking and doing, like, dash steps and stuff. Just a single animation of them, like, doing an attack will have their whole body move suddenly. There are a lot of moving attacks in this game where you can input the dodge almost frame perfectly the exact same way every single fucking time and get a different result. For instance, yesterday I fought Malekith on my 6th playthrough, and when he would do some like big leaping attack in the air where he like sticks his sword into the ground and then it follows it up with some explosion or something, some area attack right after, I'd react to him like jumping at me, and I know what move he's gonna do. I try to dodge away from him so that I'll be further away from him. I don't want to be close to him at that point because I want to outspace his area attack and then like do a jumping attack to whiff punish him or something. That's the idea. But because he's moving so much and he's literally just above your head, when I inputted a back dodge or whatever, the camera was fucking up and like tracking him through the movement at that time, and it turned my away dodge into a forward dodge where my character wound up moving closer to him instead, and that fucked me over. Sometimes this inconsistency will make you, like, clip onto the enemy's body and be dragged along with their movement while they're moving. It's super loose and fucked up. You know, you'll constantly do the exact same thing and respond to the same situation the same way, and yet some weird fucking movement shit happens. Where you'll, like, pass by each other like two ships in the night. If you do whiff punish stuff with a jump attack, you might go all the way over their body, because as soon as you're slightly above an enemy, it will just slide you off in any random direction. It's fucked up. I don't know if DS3 had this, but Elden Ring definitely does. When you turn around, like when you're moving in one direction and then you move in the opposite direction, it does this little turnaround animation. And this, for some reason, locks you out of dodging. Not only are there bad controls, but there are extremely unclear controls and systems as well. Let me explain some of this shit, man. hit stun is probably the biggest problem in the game. So in the previous games, there aren't a lot of combos, quote unquote. There are not a lot of situations in the previous games where, like, there are not a lot of moves that an enemy will hit you with that will flat out combo into the next attack, the next swing. And there isn't just a lot of hit stun in general. Like, if you get hit by one attack, if you're fighting, like, multiple enemies, like 3 enemies in a group, if you get hit by one attack, it is very rare for another enemy to also hit you with their attack and have it combo. Usually, if you get hit by one attack, that's it, and then you can proceed to avoid any other attacks in the environment or follow-up attacks. In DS3 and Elden Ring, there are a lot of attacks that have massive, insane levels of hit stun, with and combo strings where the next attack you cannot dodge or block or do anything in between. It's a guaranteed follow-up. It's a combo. Now, here comes the... Sometimes this is literally RNG. For instance, Malenia has an armor move that she will do while approaching you sometimes, where she does, like, and it has, like, this little wind effect, where she does, like, a spinning around knee, or, like, kick attack, or whatever it is, where she's not using her sword. If you fought her, you know what move it is. She does, like, this twirling knee attack. And that puts you into very heavy hit stun. Now, the thing is, what she does next is totally random. She has a bunch of random follow-ups that she can do. Some of her follow-ups are so fast that they will literally combo you, and some of them won't, which means that the amount of damage that you take for getting hit by that knee attack is totally random. Because sometimes it's just the one hit, and then you can avoid the next attack, and sometimes it true combos into a lot more damage. Totally randomly, the amount of punishment that you receive for getting hit by this attack is totally inconsistent because of this system. But yeah, anyways, beyond that, yeah, in DS3 and Elden Ring, there's lots of combos that enemies can do to you, or in group settings. Now, here comes the weird part with it. Not only is it never clear what is a true combo and what isn't, you know, you never know if you could have avoided an attack or not. It's not good to hit a dodge button if you're not allowed to dodge, you know? If an enemy does say if you get hit by a move A, and then you try to dodge move B, but it was actually a true combo, A and B combo into each other, if it's a true combo and you can't dodge, the fact that you hit the dodge button to try to avoid move B will screw you over, because it will then buffer your dodge after move B and get you hit by move C. But yeah, DS3 has a bunch of different kinds of hit stun as well. DS3 and Elden Ring. The most obvious example of this is when you're knocked on your back. I think everyone knows this. Everyone who's played the game, even if you didn't consciously think about it, you would know that the game works like this. Your character has this really long, obnoxious animation for getting off their back onto their feet. And you can be hit during this process. But while you're getting back up, after a certain point, while you're getting back up, you can dodge. You can't move, you can't block, you can't take any other action, but you can dodge. This is never explained in the game systems, but at least in that instance, most people who play the game, they know that it's clear when you're in that specific type of hit stun, when you're in that get up animation, your only defensive option is to dodge. However, there is at least one type of standing hit stun where the exact same concept applies. You can defend, but only with a dodge. No other inputs will register. If you don't dodge, you will get hit by the next attack, because you're technically still vulnerable. So there are true combos that you cannot dodge, and then there are fake combos, where they will combo you, like you can't block in between them, but you could have dodged in between them. Only dodge, nothing else. This also is never explained by the game, but is also, even if you know that it exists, it is totally unclear while you're playing. It's impossible, genuinely impossible, without just reading the code of the game. You will never know what kind of hit stun you're in. If you hold block, but you get hit by 2 attacks back-to-back as a combo, you just have to wonder to yourself, could I have dodged that? Or maybe it was a true combo. It's risky to try to do anything differently. Like, it's risky to hit the dodge button if you can't dodge it because of the stupid buffering system, and this will get much worse if you're hit by a super fast sequence of rapid attacks. You know, how should you defend? What type of hit stun are you in right now? What will combo you and what won't? Is this a fake combo where you can dodge this but you can't block it or do any other action? It sucks, and it is a total clusterfuck of complete unclearness and lack of any information. right? You'll go through many sequences where you get hit and hit stun, where you just be completely baffled as to what the game is even doing, right? How did it take your inputs? Did it do weird buffers with your inputs that made your character do things you didn't actually intend? Did it ignore this? Like, could you have avoided that hit here and there? It will just become super clusterfucky. The games before DS3 didn't have these problems because they had almost no hit stun, you know? You never got comboed by anything. It was just individual hits, even when fighting multiple enemies, right? Whenever you get hit by anything, by a single enemy or a group setting in Elden Ring, everything that happens afterwards is completely unclear and random. You might get comboed by the other enemies in the environment. You just have to wonder if you could have avoided any of it, if the game missed your input or something, if the game buffered your input in a weird way, like buffered something that made you get hit by the follow-up, so on and so forth. The game generally works fine when you don't get hit by anything, but the second you get clipped by any fucking hit, the mechanics will become completely incomprehensible. There are also, of course, the attacks that hit too frequently for you to dodge at all, like 2 hits back to back, like I said, where, let's say you don't get hit by, but you dodge the first one, but then the second one just hits your dodge recovery anyways. Moves that have just flat out too many active frames, or multi-hit attacks, so the second one covers your roll anyway, so fuck you for even trying to dodge. These attacks intentionally, like, you can either deal with them by dodging them at a certain spacing, although the spacing can be incredibly unclear sometimes if the attack is triggered in an awkward place, if the camera is going nuts, if you're caught on the space box or the level geometry or something, if it clips you in a weird way and drags your body along with their movement, thus placing you in an inconsistent place where your dodge will not put you in the same place that it usually does, or so on. Like, Radahn has moves like this. He has like this 3-hit spinning slash that hits too frequently for you to dodge using the invuln of a roll. You can't avoid the third hit. You can avoid the first and second hits, but the third hit will clip you if you dodge it. However, if you dodge the first 2 attacks and you use your dodge to go in a direction where the third one won't reach you, you can avoid it entirely. But this can be very inconsistent due to the dogshit camera. His big body that sometimes just drags you along with him, and sometimes yanks your camera right when you dodge, you know, thus making your dodge go in a different direction. Sometimes he can trigger this attack while facing a totally different direction than normal, right? He can do some move that whiffs and makes him face a different direction and then trigger this attack in an angle where it then becomes incredibly unclear where it's going to hit, where his movement's going to put him, right? And how much auto-tracking it's going to have, how much can he rotate before the hit lands. Like, if you're literally 180 degrees behind, if you're literally at the backside of an enemy and they start doing a move, you have to wonder how much rotation will occur due to the shitty auto-tracking. Also, minor point of annoying controls, I don't like the item pickup input. I don't like the item pickup animation for picking up, like, items that are left in the stage. It's obnoxious in environments that have, like, a million fucking items for you to pick up. So many times I move over an item and I clearly hit or mash the fucking item pickup, and it doesn't pick it up. A lot of animations will lock you out of picking up shit, and it just feels shitty. Sometimes I would hammer, like, the dismount button on the horse, like, 6 fucking times back to back. I'm just going in a direction, just hitting the fucking dismount button, and he's not getting off this fucking horse, man. Sometimes I'd be very clearly sprint jumping on the ground, but then suddenly my character would just cut the momentum and just not sprint jump. I think this is because the sprint button and the jump button are right next to each other on the controller, and I'm hitting both of them with the same finger. So I think that in certain places when I press the jump button, it, like, registered that I released the sprint button, I'm guessing, just because it's awkwardly placed on the control scheme. But it just randomly will just, like, cut your momentum, and it feels like shit. And it can kill you. So those are my biggest gameplay problems with DS3. Missing one minor point, because it is a small criticism in 3, it's a much bigger issue in Elden Ring. And that is the motherfucking animations on these attacks. First of all, there are about 1 million enemies and bosses in Elden Ring that are, like, really tall. At least taller than your player character, and will also do animations and stuff where they, like, lean over your character, thus, like, becoming, like right in your face, you know? And you have to be close to them to hit them with any melee attack. Which means when you're in melee range to land your attacks, with the erratic, absurd movement enemies have during some of their attacks, almost all the time, honestly, the camera gets super fucked up, and only part of the enemy is even in frame. When you're fighting giants, when you're fighting tall guys that, like, get up in your face, You're hitting their legs. You can barely tell what the fuck they're doing half the time, where you should dodge. You can't see their animations because you're underneath them. DS3 also has the annoyance of auto-tracking. Auto-tracking is just when enemies literally just rotate while they attack to face your direction. The problem with this, the biggest unfairness about this, is that because it's literally not animated, right? It's just purely they're rotating the character model. They're just translating it. You never know how much they will turn to face you. It's terrible game communication because the animations are literally lying to you. It's totally unfair. If I'm, like, you know, if you're behind an enemy, you have to be terrified of the auto tracking. You have to be terrified about like these wonk ass hitboxes where attacks might just hit all the way behind an enemy when they swing for some fucking reason. Some auto tracking is so fast it looks super shitty. And it's already a bad thing to put in the game because it looks ugly, it's visually unclear, it fails to communicate anything to the player, and it's just a way for animators to not correctly convey gameplay function with their animations, which is literally their fucking jobs. An attack animation in a game should show you where an attack will hit, but auto-tracking just moves the character through time and space to make them hit somewhere the animation did not convey. Auto-tracking is super common and extreme in DS3 and Elden Ring, and it's just bad game design, period. So yeah, fighting tall enemies gets really shitty. It's extremely hard to clearly see animations a lot of the time, and most enemies in this game, or most bosses, are big, and you have to get up in their grill to hit them. A lot of enemies have moves where they go into the air right, like, on top of you or next to you, and to see them, you need your auto lock-on camera to go up your own player's asshole to look straight up at the fucking enemy. So you either look at the stupid enemy above you, and you still can't see shit, or you get to look at everything else around you. You don't get to do both. So when you're in environments where there are other enemies, plus enemies that, like, leap all the way into the air, you're fucked. You can't see shit, man. But beyond that, the attack animations in this game are fucking ludicrous. So the past Soulsborne games are all about basic observation and learning, right? They're designed so you can hang around outside the enemy's attack ranges, play it safe, collect information, you know, not do anything committal, and the information is easy to collect if you're looking for it. In Elden Ring, the game seems like it's actively trying to not communicate or convey information to the player. Everything seems to be animated incorrectly on purpose. Everything is animated wrong on purpose. Like, an attack will just start swinging one speed, implying a certain arc, implying a certain space it will hit, implying a certain time it will hit, based on the speed of the arc, but the animation will just slow down or cut entirely at some point, and then just hit at a different timing. The character model will just slide across the ground with a flash step, like their feet will just slide across the floor, so their attack reaches further than visually their arm and their body movement was conveying that they could have possibly physically reached. The animations literally just lie to you, over and over and over. You know all those moves where an enemy just holds their blade unmovingly, just they hold it in like a single position, and for like 5 seconds straight, and then they suddenly swing, like faster than you can react to once they start moving again? Like Radahn will like ride right next to you and just fucking hold his blade perfectly still, and then after 5 seconds of waiting, he swings at an unreactable speed at you. The animation doesn't tell you anything about what the timing is. The game is literally just trying not to communicate gameplay function.
Delicious. This is a perfect bite to do this shit in. Cause I only fought this guy. I only did one attempt on this guy in my first playthrough. I don't know, it's pretty fucking powerful. But when I got to my first playthrough, iced him really easily. My shield was really strong. But I was given the impression in my first playthrough that this guy's animations are fucking ludicrous. Yeah, let me fucking adjust my audio settings. Okay. Hey. So, we're going to look at his animations, okay? And we're going to try to figure out, based on his animations, when his attack will hit. Nope. Okay. Doing great so far. Yeah, that really communicates that that's when that... Okay. And see, when the animation decides to continue, it'll just, like, decide... Yeah, like, okay, his animation is just going in slow motion, now it decides it in a completely arbitrary time. Like, there's nothing about his animations that communicates anything. Nothing about the timing of his attacks. You just have to get hit by it a couple of times so you fucking see what the fucking stupid-ass timing is. He has a bunch of moves that look incredibly similar on startup because they're kind of similar. Like, he has a million just swipe attacks with that sword. Okay, I dodged. Yeah, that at least looked fluid. Yep. Just a bunch of fucking slow windups into sudden hits that are completely inconsistent. Doo-doo-doo. Okay, he waited even longer that time. Oh. Oh, I didn't input that dodge, by the way. Game lied. I have no idea when the timing is because his animations won't tell me shit. Okay. Sure. Oh. Oh, he can follow that up? I didn't even realize that. That's stupid. When does his string end then in that case? Like, sometimes he'll do, like, one move, and then you dodge it, and then you get to punish it, and sometimes he'll do, like, a fucking 12-string combo that still doesn't have a punish point. Okay, I dodged that. When does his fucking attack end? It seems like some of his strings he can just do literally infinitely. Dodged. That one's unreactable. Okay, I literally can't see what's happening because the camera's too close. So yeah, that's also, like, every fucking enemy in this game is like a giant, tall behemoth of a fucking enemy. So as soon as you get into range to attack them with half your weapons, like, at a point-blank range, they'll do, like, some imposing attack, and the camera will just go up their asshole, and you can't see a goddamn thing. Okay, so now we're getting most of the timings on most of his attacks. I mean, my dodge input is not triggering consistently, but that was a dodge that I didn't input. Very cool. Yeah, fuck off. God, you literally don't get to fucking heal. The enemies are too Dark Souls 3-esque. Just pick the fucking timing. Animation doesn't tell you shit, so just fucking... I don't know, man. All of his animations are so fucking bad. Sometimes the attack comes out in a fucking, like, blink of an eye. on the start of his animation, sometimes he like starts like waving his arm. Like imagine that. Imagine like you're like doing like sword combat and your arm just like starts speeding and slowing down and I'm like woo woo woo. Fucking retarded.
This is just another thing that is not only kind of just like shitty game design in general, it's just shitty period, just like auto tracking. Like, you should fucking animate your moves to convey gameplay function. You should convey the game mechanics so that they're clear to the player, and the player is playing against the game, not just your inability to animate anything correctly. So, just communicate correct information so that they can fucking play. But yeah, not only is this generally shitty, it's yet another design trend that makes it harder to win through patience and observation, thus giving you more incentive to not be patient and not be observant, because it's much harder to do that in this game, and instead it incentivizes you to just mash the dodge button to avoid attacks, since the likelihood of your dodge mashing saving you is much, much higher. You're much more likely to survive an attack that you see and don't know the timing of by mashing dodge than you are likely to avoid it by trying to dodge moves based on your eyesight and what you can fucking see on screen, when the animations are literally just lying to you. Just another way shitty, dogshit, thoughtless play is much stronger in Elden Ring, and careful play is weak and shitty and doesn't work. The animations in this game are so bad so much of the time. A lot of enemies have, like, attacks where they just jump up and slam down. Not even flying enemies, just regular enemies, bound by the laws of gravity, and yet the animation, when they're in air, will have them pause in the air, and then all of a sudden, like, gravity will just, like, double in acceleration, and they just shoot down. It looks so fucking stupid, it just lies to you, it makes no physical sense, that's not how gravity works. There's a kind of attack I find extremely annoying where an enemy will, like, hit you, well, like, they'll hit the ground, right? I think the stupidest one of these is there's a kind of, like, the stone giants, the stone golem giant, whatever, with the staffs, and they have a move where they will, like, plunge their staff into the ground, like, in front of them, they'll, like, just stab it, and then they will pull their weapon out of the ground, and somehow this is supposed to be an attack that, like, has a huge area of effect? It doesn't make any sense. It's a stupid fucking concept for an attack anyways. Its animation looks dumb as fuck. A ton of enemies just have moves that look almost identical to each other as well, but hit at different timings, you know? Like Radigan, right? Like, Radigan has, like, a sequence where he has, like, he'll go into a stomp, but then he also has another stomp where he lifts his knee up in the exact same way, but it's a slower stomp. And so if you react to him lifting his knee up, which is literally the same animation, you just have to guess, because it's the same fucking animation for two different moves. Tons of enemies have animations that just look basically identical. Like, they raise their hand in this way, and it looks the exact same as when they raise their arm in that way, but they're two different attacks. You know, the startups of multiple different attacks just literally just look the same, or might as well look almost the same. You know, there are tons of very unclear animations because they didn't fucking think to actually have things, like, resemble differently. Like, Radahn has this really annoying one where, in a certain situation, he can either raise his arm, he can raise his back arm, the one that's further away from you, up, like, around behind his back and over his head, pulling it from the side and then bring it down on you, or he can do an attack at the same spot with the same arm where he pulls his blade in the same direction, right around his back, right at the start, but instead, he just rests it on the ground behind it, and then he drags it at you at a later timing than the other move. I don't know why I keep using Radahn as an example. He's actually one of the few enemies in the game I kind of liked fighting, but I guess that's, I know his moveset very well, so he's what I go to in my head. So yeah, your basic human instincts are constantly fighting you. A move looks visually like it will hit at this timing, but instead it's actually faster or slower, or faster and slower and faster and slower, like speeding and slowing, for no fucking reason. Your observation hurts you. Having eyeballs hurts you. Having a brain hurts you. Paying attention hurts you. As for my other complaints about the combat, stamina management is now less of a focus than ever before. It's not much of a focus in DS3, and it, like, barely exists in this game. The game, honestly, most of the time is just dumbed down to this incredible simplicity and lack of nuance that is just like, dodge this attack at the right timing, and, like, that's almost the whole game. if you want to play like that, Sekiro is more simplistic, but it's also like built around that simplicity. It's more thrilling and more mechanically sound and has better controls. Horse movement in Elden Ring is pretty clunky and annoying. Your horse is insanely vulnerable and just gets weaker and weaker as the game keeps going, both in terms of their of the horse's health gets relatively lower as the game goes on. The horse has no defensive options. Sometimes you can be straight up after a lot of the time, you can be straight up comboed to death from full health on horseback, since as soon as you get hit by something, the hits don't last a year. You can't jump out of it, you can't dash out of it, and you cannot dismount out of it, and you just get knocked down, and then you get hit once again on the ground, and then you just die. My next big complaint about the gameplay is jumping attacks. Jumping attacks and block counterattacks. Now, only my first playthrough involved me using a shield. I haven't been using a shield for any of them, and I do think, retroactively, using a shield makes the game much less obnoxious to play. I think there are a lot of things that are just less annoying and more enjoyable if you do have a good shield. But yeah, block counterattacks and jump attacks, stupidly good. Both of which they don't clang off of enemy shields either, so their utility is basically almost all situations. Jump attacks have a lot of range due to the fact that you jump at the start, and they're usually faster than grounded heavy attacks. They deal more damage, they do more stagger, more poise break and stuff. A lot of the game boils down to, can you jump heavy this enemy over and over, or are you fucked? Let me explain. Take a strong enemy from DS3, right? Let's take a look at the Silver Knights in DS3. They have shields. You don't want to hit their shields, you'll clang off of them. They have fairly fast attacks and a couple of armor moves and such. They have long strings where they can cancel various moves into other moves, and it has a complicated web of which cancels they're allowed to do, starting from which move or what move they started, how far they can go before they have to stop. They can't do it infinitely, technically. And if you want to carefully damage them without relying on gimmicky game mechanics like parries or armor moves of your own or any of that shit, you really have to break down their moveset if you want to kill them without getting a single hit on yourself. Figure out which strings are the true end of their attack strings, which strings have gaps that can be safely punished that you can knock them out of, figure out which attacks have armor and which don't, find places where you can get guaranteed blows in the middle of their strings to interrupt, figure out which attacks let you sidle behind the enemy and get a backstab range. Even if you don't get all the way to backstab range, so long as you're behind their shield, they can't block, and you can land a series of blows, and with each attack he lands, the Silver Knights and other enemies in particular are allowed to turn to face you a little bit more. So the larger the angle that you are behind an enemy's back, the more hits you can get in a row before he can finally rotate to block you again. There's this whole ass system to just this one-on-one for this one enemy, and that can be fun. I will admit, I have issues with that game design, but that can be fun. I do like fighting those Silver Knights. In Elden Ring, jump heavies are so fucking good, you just, in comparable knights, let's take the knights in Landau, right? You just do it every time you can do anything. There's a couple of instances where you don't quite have time to get a jump heavy out, so you do a regular attack. I don't think there's basically ever a reason to do regular heavy attacks unless you do the full charge of it, and even then, the full charge heavy attacks are not very good. Most of the time. If the enemy is blocking, we'll do a jump heavy attack. If they block it, you won't clang off their shield. You'll put them into heavy block stun. You'll deal a lot of stamina damage. If they happen to do something in that moment, you'll most likely knock them out of it because it's your heaviest hitting and most poise breaking attack. If they whiff an attack, jump heavy punch. It's the best whiff punish. It gets the furthest, the fastest. It does the most damage. It does the best hit stun as well to let you get follow-ups. Usually lets you combo into another strike. There just isn't a ton of nuance to combat interactions. In the past games, you could dodge some attacks and get small punishes or certain positional advantages that you can get more damage. You could space yourself properly to walk around attacks and get more optimal, heavier whiff punishes that spend less stamina due to not having to roll to avoid it, and so on. But in this, you just fucking jump heavy, man. Or attacks that are slightly faster. Sometimes you'll do a roll attack, consecutive swings, or overpowered gimmicky spammy bullshit like weapon hearts. And just some of these enemies just take so goddamn long to kill. If you just take your little pokes and little whiff punishes here and there, just jump heavy, man. Jump heavy everything. For fishing for hits, to get consecutive blows in and so forth, jump heavy. So the nuance of combat is shot due to jump heavy being relied on so much. Spacing is not really a thing. The nuance of choosing which option to pick, and this spacing or that spacing, and the fact that spacing is mostly non-existent in this game anyways because of how fucking drastically far every enemy attack reaches. And if you can't get away with jump heavy in most situations, most of the time you can't get away with anything else either. Just like I complained about in DS3, one enemy is annoying, two are bullshit, because they make each enemy so mobile and hard to land solid hits on and be in the exact right spot to punish them consistently and safely, and they have super fast recovery, so you only have a small window to punish them. You can't take your eyes off them even for a millisecond, even if they just whipped an attack, even if they're a mile away from you. You have to be worried about them still hitting you a half second later because of how fucking far they can reach in 2 fucking milliseconds, making multiple enemies either a wall of annoying active frames where they just cluster together and just keep fucking swinging at you, but you can't, or a situation where you can't keep your camera on all of them at once. And audio cues sucking ass in this game, so, like, you can't fight an enemy and then have good audio cues to tell you when a projectile might be coming from you from an enemy that is not currently in your camera view. It's just not very tenable. The DS3 aspects of the enemies, combined with the new issues of having so many big enemies that are awkward to see when you get close to them, wind up creating a situation where there are almost no enemies in this game that I really like fighting, I'll be honest. Even DS3 had enemies that I liked fighting. It had quite a few. It had enemies that I really didn't like fighting. It had areas that I was like, man, this is fucking boring. It had a lot of areas where they just shove a million enemies that are not fun to fight against in groups or in individual senses that just fucking suck and are lame and just want to run past to get to an area that's actually kind of fun to play against. And even if the fact that certain individual enemies had design elements I disagree with or felt were bad ideas in the long run because they're too designed for one-on-one and they don't fit as well into complex, fair group fights. This game, man, like, every enemy or boss fight is either like, ew, that's annoying, I don't want to do that, or that's okay, I guess, I suppose I can do that. Even when a boss fight might be fun, it's usually ruined by the bad controls, the shitty camera, you know, like, I don't know how many times I said, fuck you, I hit the button on time fighting Melania, or like her shitty wings in her phase 2 that made it fucking impossible to see what animation she was doing, or that her moveset is so RNG based, you know, sometimes, like in phase 2 especially, she just do moves that you could dodge and punish and get a big punish for, or sometimes she just does moves where you can't punish anything safely, and sometimes she does extremely dangerous moves that are very likely to kill you, and that you also can't even punish once they're done. I would like that fight, if not for all of... I would enjoy fighting Melania, if not for the annoyances and the inherent clunkiness of the shitty controls of combat. And some of the intensely RNG-based shit. Let me think about what enemies and bosses I really actually do enjoy fighting, having beaten the game 6 times. Godfrey is okay. Well, Godfrey is more dependent on your moveset, I think. I don't know. When I beat a game multiple times through, I get more annoyed by things that I can't kill quicker. And one obnoxious part about this and DS and some of the other stuff is that if you don't have the right build, you don't really control how quickly you can kill enemies, you know? Like in Bloodborne, even if you have enemies that have armor moves and such, if you know what you're doing, you can spend 90% of the time attacking, you know? You can spend 90% of the time, you're not forced to just dodge and dodge and dodge until you get one safe hit to land on the enemy, you know? You actually have some control over maintaining a spacing that allows you to be safe, or getting lots of hits in between every single attack or anything like that. Whereas in this, there are lots of instances where you're just kind of forced to, if you want to be truly safe, you're forced to do nothing, flat out nothing, for a long period of time, and when you get a hit, you only get like one hit or something, which sucks for certain builds that have to land multiple hits in a quick succession, like Frost or Bleed or anything like that, that work better for that, or if you have a buff that won't last forever, for example. So, Godfrey was fun when I had, like, a simple moveset of just, like, 2 great swords, where I did a shitload of damage on individual hits, and I could just avoid it and then get my hits in, and it was, like, fine. And it was not so fun on my most recent playthrough, where I had, like, faster weapons, but I still can't land multiple hits back to back to back safely, because it's not really viable to do that. like, it, Godfrey, as with many fights in the game, it also has, like, the problem of the fact that, like, the fight is basically just, like, the only options are dodge or block, and some moves jump. Like, the game is simplified down to just dodging at the right time and swinging. So, it's pretty boring and lacks nuance compared to the better bosses in the series, or with games that also have simple mechanics but are just more engaging, like Sekiro. But yeah, I like Godfrey / Horaloo. Well, Horaloo is slightly more annoying. He's a bit more RNG based because he has less moves that are like very easy to get actual punishes on. Weirdly enough, Horaloo is more likely to give you opportunities to punish him if you just let him hit you. You know, if you just let him like kick you or something, then he'll just whiff his grab and you get a million hits on him. So, kind of a weird fight. But Godfrey, at least, I have basically not many issues with him. Plus, I love the Horaloo. I love the WrestleMania phase, you know? I like fighting Margit, except for one or two of his moves that are kind of shitty. I liked Godric. I kind of like Radahn, although I don't like several things about the fight. I hate a lot of his animations. I hate the start of the fight with the arrows. It's tedious and obnoxious. Overall, I'm not a fan of the damage output this game has late game. Like, actually just in general, you know, like so many times I'll be grinding something, and this is a big constant with like the game difficulty, quote unquote. So many times I will be grinding something and the whole thing isn't really hard, you know? Like, I'll be doing everything, it'll be a breeze, and then it's just like one or two things that get me sometimes. And like, I'll be avoiding 100%, punishing everything cleanly, tearing through a thing, you know, like chipping away at them. The fight isn't hard at all. It's not a challenge. Only just get hit by some awkward ass situation or move that is kind of weird or kind of unfair or something, or a move that works inconsistently or anything, and I could get iced from full health by just a bad situation. It doesn't ever feel like the fight is really hard, like it's consistently, like the whole thing is hard. It just feels like it just kills me sometimes, you know? Like, if that makes sense, you know? The game is not hard, it just kills you sometimes, and that's pretty fucking obnoxious. Even fights that, like, will kill you a lot of times, you know, where it takes a bunch of attempts to not die, even then, they don't feel they're hard, they just feel like, oh, it killed me sometimes. Like, I would say over half of my deaths against Malenia were just because I got bad RNG with the fucking, accidentally being too close to her. I say accidentally, but you have no control over it, really. Of happening to being too close to her when she started her insta-kill. It's not an instant kill all the time, but you know the move I'm talking about, obviously. Yeah. More than any previous Soulsborne, there were several moments where I thought, I know how to deal with literally every single thing just fine, except for the one move which I don't understand at all. There are other instances, like, I know how to deal with every single thing just fine, except that the animations are constantly lying to me, and it's hard to consistently keep the timing when the animations are just fucking wrong all the time. Or, wow, this hitbox is wonk as fuck, or wow, these active frames are wonk as fuck. I dodged it correctly, and I still got hit. What the fuck just happened? Stuff like that. So, yeah. That was the case with Radahn on my first playthrough. I would, like, no-hit him Phase 1 and Phase 2... Phase 1 and 2, a bunch of runs, and then I would instantaneously die to his, like, special rock summoning, the thing that he does on Phase 3. Over and over, like, multiple attempts. Malenia was more obvious, you know, the move everyone knows about. I looked at it kill me over and over, and I just didn't get it. It was one of those it was honestly a weird instance I've never had in Soulsborne, where it's like, I was getting bored of grinding the fight, kind of early on, because I had figured out, like, mostly consistent solutions. Well, you know, eventually I did get a mostly consistent solution for shield users, at least, for my first playthrough against the bullshit move. But it was fucking, like, it was boring. It was genuinely boring to play it before then, because I wasn't getting good at the boss fight. I wasn't getting good at the rest of the fight. I was already doing the rest of the fight just fine. I could, like, whittle her health down. It's just whenever she did that, I had no fucking clue what the hell the game wanted me to do, and I would just die. So I would just run the next attempt, and I would then play and do everything perfectly fine, except for that one part, and I would just die. And I'd be like, what the fuck what's happening? What's the point? What am I doing? Back to enemies I actually enjoyed fighting. I don't think I liked fighting almost any of the mobs in this game. I think almost every single one of them is either, like, acceptable or annoying. Or really annoying. None of them are designed with slow attacks and long recovery and slow movement like in the better games, so they don't ever work well in groups. And unless it's like these thin zombies, you just fight hordes of like tanky, annoying assholes, which isn't fun or nuanced either, you know? I think I like fighting the misbegottens, I guess. I don't mind the misbegottens as much. At least the non-flying ones. I remember having group fights with them in Castle Morn that were actually kind of fun. Apparently, I'm just a psychopath because I kind of liked fighting the Godskin duo. Yeah, I mean, it is unfair, and it is like a shitty fight, but I think most of the people that enjoy this game play it the way it's supposed to be played, meaning, like, brain-dead aggression, brain-dead mashing dodge, not analyzing the situation, not being patient and waiting for individual safe opportunities. So Godskin Duo is definitely not like the best duo fight in the series or anything. It's shitty, but it is conceptually it is interesting, and it wasn't the worst two enemy fight in the game by a long margin. Let me explain. There are I think 3 mechanics in the game that I thought were clever and I like in concept with their unique elements. I like Malenia's healing mechanic because I understand that the game has parts where it wants to force you to dodge and know how to dodge in order to beat the fight, you know? I'm not a big fan of Malekith, for instance, of at least Malekith's game design, his second phase, where he has attacks that will home in on you, you can't outspace them, you can't be out of the range for them, they will hit your position, so you have to dodge, and you just have to know the correct dodge timing. They will kill you on block, so you have no choice but to just get hit a few times until you've seen them enough to understand the dodge timing. In concept, I love Malenia's healing instead of this Malekith thing because it achieves the same result. You have to learn to dodge. You have to learn the dodge timings, but instead of just killing you and wasting your time like Malekith does, where it kills you just as a fucking preamble for you to get the relatively simple and easy to avoid moves, with Malenia, you can just block it forever. You can literally survive forever against Malenia. She has literally no way of killing you if you just block. She has a grab, but it's easy to see and avoid, which lets you observe her moveset for as long as you want on any attempt until you decide to start engaging, at least on phase 1. Theoretically, every boss in the series could have the same mechanic Malenia does, and it would be a great way to not kill the player, but still force them to dodge everything they want, while encouraging them to learn, you know? When you do learn the fight against Malenia, the mechanic basically doesn't even exist anymore, because she's never going to hit you. It's purely a mechanic that only assists with learning the fight, which is rare because it seems like so much of this game wants to obfuscate the learning as much as possible. I think the Godskin Duo's mechanic is interesting because they're both enemies with phase 2s, with moves that make them more dangerous when they're in phase 2. Now, I don't know what happens... that's not true. I do know what happens if you kill them both. One of them comes back arbitrarily. But yeah, the mechanic creates an interesting tactical decision for the player. The skinny one is much easier to deal with in his phase 2. So, if you're going to damage one of them, you want it to be the skinny one. And, you know, you want to put the skinny one in phase 2 rather than the big guy. But once you kill the skinny one, you have a choice to make. Do you take your free hits against the fat one while he's by himself? What if you don't manage to kill him? And if you put him under 50% and then the skinny guy comes back before then, you'll create a situation where the fight's much harder. You know? Because Fatty's phase 2 moves are really hard to deal with. Or do you wait for the skinny one to come back without landing hits on the fat one, but forgo all the damage that you earned the opportunity to land now that it's just one-on-one? It's an interesting damage distribution and damage dumping tactical fight. It's not terrible in terms of giving you some chances to land safe hits, like some of the other duo fights are in the game where you just basically get nothing. It's one of the few fights in the game where I actually appreciate the strategy of viewing it through the risk-reward. And no, I didn't use summons in my first or second playthroughs. I don't like those kinds of mechanics in general. Although I do think after having played it more, I think a lot of the game is like built around, like you definitely do have to abuse cheap shit against cheap shit in this game, so It's kind of built into the game, but I don't like it because it's not something you can intentionally take advantage of, since you have no control over your summons AI or how effective they'll be or anything like that. It's just something that is generally cheap that generally helps you. But it's not like, it doesn't, you have no like strategic control over it. You can't master it as a mechanic. It's just you summon a guy. I don't see how it's this like big shaming thing or anything. Like, you know, there's so many cheap things in the game, and players can play the game however the fuck they want, you know? Almost all the side bosses are boring or unengaging or painfully irritating, like the duo cat statue fight or the triple Crystallian fight. I think Renala is one of the most interesting fights in the game, and therefore the most engaging in the game, but the first phase is like barely a boss fight. It's super easy. It's not even a thing. And the second phase is mostly just dodging attacks and moving forwards again. There's some attacks being more annoying than others. It's kind of interesting, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's a single other enemy I actually enjoyed fighting in this game or would want to fight again for fun. It's just, most enemies are just not fun to fight. It's just they have moves that are just obnoxious to dodge due to shitty animations, shitty hitboxes, shitty animations, shitty active frames, and shitty animations. Also, as a near final note, this game is fucking obsessed with enemies around corners. It's addicted to, like, trolly enemy placements. And also, I mean, that fits in line with trolly animations that just lie to you about spacings and timings. A lot of trolly bullshit in this game. The enemies around corners get really fucking exhausting as the game keeps going. Even when you know that they're there, like the enemy is placed around this corner and is going to swing at you, they're still awkward to take out. You know, it's not fun to go through a level with enemies around corners, even if you know that they're there. I just got really sick of them after a while. My final big point is about the creativity of the game. And I feel bad even calling it that, because basically the game has a certain sense of repetition feeling to it, like most open world games do. The exploration feels systematic and samey after a while, which is just naturally going to happen. You just look around every corner, over every ledge. A ton of the level design feels kind of samey in how you approach it. Like, okay, think about it like this way, right? Take Demon Souls, right? 4 different levels, 1-1, 1-2, 3-1, 3-2. Each of those 4 levels is radically different in terms of level structure and how you approach it. The Prison of Hope especially stands out because it's all about these corridors and getting like the right keys to jail cells and coming back and opening these cells and paths to other cell blocks. It feels totally different than exploring like 1-2, the big bridge that you just bolt across and try to avoid the stage hazards of. Or the more Soulsborne level design of 1-1. The level design is so streamlined by now, it's a shame that it doesn't have weird shit that feels super different in this game. And the combat as well, it feels very streamlined. All of the enemies just feel kind of like just variations of each other. They have similar attacks, dodge this move, roll this sequence, blah 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 blah. I thought that with such a massive game, with so many enemies and so many bosses, this game would be the one that gets more creative with its enemies, not less creative. The most unique boss in this game is Renala, Phase 1, and that doesn't force you to engage with it in interesting ways, because it's too fucking easy. Like, say, the fight reminds me of the first boss of No More Heroes 2, right, in theory, where as the fight goes on, more environmental stage hazard get added, but Renala Phase 1 dies too fast, and nothing really obstructs you from just running and bolting and hitting the glowing guys. You barely pay attention to the stage hazards that are there, so it barely forces you to engage with what is easily the most unique boss in terms of concept. You don't get more gimmicky, out-of-the-box bosses like, I don't know, Fool's Idol, Phalanx, Old Hero, Gaping Dragon, Dark Lurker, Looking Glass Knight, Skeleton Lords, Crystal Sage, High Lord Wolnir, Dragon Slayer armor, Twin Demons, Bloodstarved Beast with his lingering poison effects and trailing and shit, Mikolash, Rom, Shadows of Yharnam, Witch of Hemwick, the Living Failures, the Painting Monkeys in Sekiro, or whatever else you consider more or less unique. Elden Ring just has a million straightforward combat guys that just swing at you a bunch and you just dodge them a bunch and hit them. It definitely starts to feel like a droll, you know? When I first started fighting Radahn, I was excited about the prospect of like this. I was running against his arrows right at the start, and I was excited about the prospect of like this unique zoning boss, where it'd have me like engage in a variety of stationary, like long-range attacks, where you would constantly have to use the terrain or something to avoid his different projectiles. But no, it's just a tedious start of a fight that you just have to annoyingly do each attempt. And then you get to him, and then you just dodge his attacks and hit him, like every other fucking enemy. While the multi-enemy bosses are the shittiest in the series because they're just super simplistic AIs that do nothing but run straight at you and swing, and it just pairs you with enemies with the same fucking behavioral pathing, or in ways where it's like you have to look everywhere at once, you just can't do that, or they attack too closely together and you don't get real opportunities to do anything, like with the Crystallian fight, the triple one. I wish the game felt more fresh. But everything feels kind of streamlined and unwilling to break the mold as the game goes on. My first playthrough definitely felt really samey by the end. I lacked the motivation to explore more and more as it went on because it felt like arbitrary crap. I rushed through most of the Hallig Tree once I got to it on my first playthrough, some of the other late game levels as well, because I was just bored by then. The enemies you fight felt like more of the same, exploring the levels felt very similar. I just wanted to get to the next thing that would actually take some attention to me, the next boss. I wanted to get to Melania. Nothing else was actually making me stop and think, to stop and do something differently, so I didn't. I think the combat is only fun in this game when you're slaughtering enemies, like really fucking them up. When you're underpowered and trying to do enemies like respectfully and carefully and whatnot, trying to avoid hits, it sucks in this game because you're very often just one clunky, shitty control or badly made game fuckery or unfair attack or combination of attacks or shitty camera movement away from instantly dying. On a side note, this is the only game in the series where I felt like respawning needs to be faster. You can go from doing everything perfectly fine, being totally okay, not making any mistakes or getting hit or clipped by anything, to instantly fucking dying in less than a single second if some stupid shit happens. This game is rarely ever consistently challenging, it just has these things that will just fuck you up all of a sudden. It gets to the point where going from doing something flawlessly to dying happens so fast that waiting for the dying animation to finish, you died on the screen, the game to load, and then the run back through like the boss door or whatever takes like 50 times longer at least than it took for you to go from doing something perfectly to being dead. While grinding some late game bosses especially, I really felt like the way that the game is designed, the game speed and how fast something will kill you all of a sudden, is so absurd. It feels like the game needs to be closer to Super Meat Boy, where you will die in one hit all of a sudden, but you're expected to suddenly die a lot, and you respawn in less than a second. I got bored and annoyed of like doing an attempt, yeah, I fucking died, and I just had to watch the death animation. I just wanted to respawn me at the start of the fight again and just get back into it. Instead it wastes time in what feels like an eternity compared to the all of a sudden death that I just experienced. But yeah, I think the game is only fun if your character is strong. I've done runs where I used weapons that were shitty in one way or another. I tried a knife run, and it is the fucking worst. For some reason in this game, fast weapons are the ones that will drain your stamina really fast. Big weapons, big slow weapons, big heavy weapons make it so you never have to look at your stamina gauge ever again. I did a double greatsword thing, and I never looked at my stamina gauge once in the game. Beyond that, knives in particular not only have worthless hitboxes, that I feel like they made it even shittier, right? Like, knives were the only way I had fun with DS3. They sucked shit in this game, man. They have no hitboxes. They have no hit stun, they have no poise break. They also deal no damage. Like, not like low damage. It takes about 10 times longer to kill anything with a knife than with like anything else. Especially with horse combat being a thing, the game is very clear that some of the weapon types just exist because it was easy to like port their combat animations and movesets over, not because they're actually fucking viable to use those weapon types. The problem with the game only being fun if you're powerful is that when you start a new game, you do need to know what to beeline for to get good shit, and different types of good shit if you want any variety in your gameplay. My easiest run of the game by far just randomly came from me happening to use 2 greatswords and gets that I got super early in the game. And the power and moveset you get is busted compared to the worthlessness of like using knives or whatever else. I have an overall sense of negativity and a lack of strong enjoyment. In the end, are any of these issues deal breakers? Not necessarily. DS3 has most of these problems, most of these things that I fucking hate, and I still like playing DS3 for the most part once I learned to play it in a way that was fun. I played DS3 with a bandit's knife that minimized most of the problems. Unfortunately, like I said, using a knife in Elden Ring doesn't go so good. They changed the design in some aspects where it's, almost every enemy type in this game has substantial poise. Even, like, regular humanoid enemies have, like, the pages, the guys with the rapiers and, like, the crossbows that shoot exploding bolts. They have poise. For some reason, if you use any knife attack on them, you will not hit stun them. You will not knock them out of their animations. Bandit, like, using a knife, it is physically incapable to knock enemies that are clearly designed that you're supposed to be able to knock them out of their animations. Knife can't do shit. And it also has worthless hitboxes in greater sense than, like, the game already has bad hitboxes. Where, like, sometimes you'll literally be, like a dick's inch away from an enemy right in front of their face swinging at them, and, like, because of the shittiness of the hitboxes and the space boxes, you literally just aren't hitting them. But yeah. I don't like, I think some of the bosses are fine, especially early game. I don't like starting new playthroughs of DS3. I really don't like the early game in DS3, but yeah, I don't know. I think DS3's DLCs are much better than the main game, so maybe Elden Ring will have DLCs that are really good. I think I said this in my DS3 video, but I like Soulsborne games because they are easy. You just have to have very basic observational skills and memorize a couple of things, and you can play the games in your sleep. By trying to make the games more difficult for people who have eyeballs and don't just charge headfirst into things, all they end up doing is they don't actually make it more difficult, they just alter the game balance, so they make it so that playing brain dead is much stronger, and being patient and passive is weaker. You know, they don't make it truly challenging by trying to take easy games and make them a bit harder. They're just succeeding at making them feel annoying. I beat Melania after memorizing and testing how her moves worked and optimizing safe play against her, and it didn't feel like a meaningful accomplishment when I beat her. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't really hard either. It was just obfuscated and required a bit of time and effort. On my replays of this game, with different builds so far, most of the game has either been piss cake easy, or things that would sometimes kill me repeatedly in obnoxious ways just because the damage output is really fucking high, or their attacks are so goofy and incorrectly animated. So it's hard to, like, get back into this fight and, like, get used to, like, fighting if I haven't fought this enemy in, like, 20 hours, because I started a new playthrough and I go back to fighting this boss again. His animations are so fucking wonk and just wrong. They're just wrongly animated, so it then starts fucking confusing me and tricking me into getting the wrong timings again. Even if I've beaten the enemy, like, I've beaten Melania like 6 fucking times. But, yeah. I'd memorize the fight but still get clipped by shit here and there, and it's just obnoxious. Not enough for the fight to actually be, like, hard, like something that really feels like an accomplishment to beat, but just enough for me to die a few times. That does not feel satisfying to beat, man. That just feels like an annoying waste of time on what is otherwise a pretty easy game to clear. It just gets a few hits in, a few deaths on you, without ever really providing an obstacle that might seriously halt your progress, like in something like Celeste, or like when you play Hades on higher heat levels. Maybe I'm in the minority on this front, and that's fine. But I want to memorize and optimize these bosses and then be able to do them while passing out on Xanax. I want them to be fucking easy, man. I don't want to be clipped by this attack because it has so many active frames that the dodge roll doesn't avoid it consistently, or its visual, like, presentation just lies about where the attack is or where the active frames are going. Like with the Radigan fight has a bunch of really wonk-ass hitbox interactions. Or, like, I don't want to get clipped by some stupid fast borderline or actually unreactable crap, like against the dogs or the rats or anything. These games should be about learning, observation, and memory, not genuine effort or, like, actually unfair bullshit. I'm not even saying that this game is the sweatiest of the series, because it isn't. It's only sweaty if you try to play it as a purist. If you just pick up some bullshit weapon with some bullshit weapon art, like the fucking Bloodhound shit the guys use, or like the Sword of Night and Flame pre-nerf, or anything else like that and just mindlessly attack and then mindlessly mash the dodge button sometimes when you need to defend, the game still isn't even remotely sweaty. I still think Bloodborne has the most engaging challenges, just due to like the Chalice dungeons with their special effects where you can add infinitely more challenging stuff without going on New Game Pluses that you have to do in order to get the Platinum Trophy to reach the Queen of Yharnam boss fight. Unfortunately, that's been most of my experience with the game. It's why I mainly have negative things to say about this, even though overall, I still think Elden Ring's like a good game. You know, I don't think it's like a shit game. I just never really enjoyed it that much, and the highlight of the game for me, in a positive sense, was just exploring Stormvale Castle for the first time. I don't like the enemies you fight in this game. None of them are fun to fight, except for a couple of them, you know. Just a lot less fun than in previous Soulsborne games where the attacks are very slow, properly telegraphed, properly animated, have tons of recovery, and they can put them in interesting group situations where you can tackle like 7 enemies at once and like perfect them. Keep your awareness up, keep your awareness of all the enemy positions and their current actions, and be able to calculate and avoid every attack and take them all out. You know, without just like mindlessly abusing area of effect things to deal with the bullshit. So yeah, I think Elden Ring is a good game, even though I only really have negative things in my mind most of the time while playing it. I find it hard to quantify because most of my enjoyment is weak. It's just addiction, like I said. It's more addiction than fun. I look at the map and I think, man, I don't really want to go to any of these places. They're all kind of fucking annoying. I grind fights, but I can't really enjoy them because of the clunkiness of the combat and the frequency of dumb bullshit getting in the way of what might have otherwise been a solid fight. If I were to order them, it's a little unclear to me, but I think my order would go DS2, DS3, DS1, Elden Ring, Sekiro, and then Bloodborne at the top. I think DS1 is just a smarter and more intelligently designed and well-crafted game, but Elden Ring isn't that bad to play and has much more content in it, and like, when you actually stop taking it seriously and end up relying on the stupid gimmicky cheap shit, at least the strong shit, it can be fun to like ice some of these fucking guys. But yeah, it's not unfun to play when you're just like crushing them under your fucking heel. All I can say is the appeal that I got and the enjoyment I got from past Soulsborne games, they're just not very strong in this, I don't think. Soulsborne games have never been actually challenging. They're not hard if you care about winning. There are plenty of ways to win, even if you don't use the especially powerful options like summons or certain other gimmicky options. They can still be fun, but I like the satisfaction of memorization and application, plain and simple, and I think open world games suck fuck. Anyways,